The old Bible had sat untouched on the upper shelf of the town's dusty archives for so long that its leather binding had grown brittle, its gilded edges dulled to a dull bronze. Eleanor Fairchild, head librarian of the St. Agnes Historical Collection, lifted it down with the careful reverence of someone handling a newborn child. She'd been working alone that afternoon, the sun outside already slipping into the amber tones of evening, when she opened the book and saw it, a whisper in the margins. It wasn't obvious at first. The ink had faded to a faint sepia, curling in a script so fine it could have been mistaken for the natural flourishes of the text. But there was something different about these words. They were not Latin verses, nor the careful work of the original scribe. They were smaller, almost secretive, and written at an angle as if the hand that penned them was in a hurry or didn't want to be noticed. Eleanor leaned closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from her eyes. The faint scent of old parchment and dust filled her lungs. She whispered the words aloud, or rather the fragments she could make out. Under the chapel, where the brothers sleep, light through the rose. Her pulse quickened. She had read enough about the Knights Templar to know the old legends, the warrior monks who had returned from the Crusades laden with both treasure and secrets. Rumors of hidden vaults, lost relics, and forbidden knowledge had surrounded them for centuries. But a marginal note in a 14th century Bible, that was new. She sat back, fingers resting on the fragile page, and let her thoughts drift. Could this be authentic? Or was it just a romantic scribble from some overzealous monk with a taste for mystery? She told herself it was probably nothing. Yet her heart thudded with the stubborn rhythm of curiosity. The sound of the clock in the reading room ticked louder now, as if measuring the moments until she decided. She glanced around. The library was empty, silent except for the faint creak of the wooden beams above. It was in this silence that she felt it. A strange sense of being invited, as though the ink itself was a hand reaching out across centuries, beckoning her to follow. She pulled out her magnifying glass and traced the faint words again, this time noting a peculiar flourish under the phrase, light through the rose. A symbol. It looked like a cross within a circle, but the cross's arms flared at the ends, unmistakably the flared Templar cross. A memory surfaced. Years ago she had attended a lecture on medieval iconography. The speaker, a retired professor named Dr. Leonard Braithwaite, had shown a slide of the same cross carved into the keystone of a ruined chapel not far from town. It was said to be built by a Templar sympathizer in the early 1300s. And didn't that chapel have a rose window? Her hands trembled slightly as she set the book down. The marginal note had just crossed the threshold from interesting curiosity to possible lead. She was no adventurer. Her life was one of cataloguing, preservation, and scholarly caution. Yet, here she was, considering whether to chase after a centuries-old clue like some character in a pulp novel. The shadows in the reading room deepened as the last rays of sunlight bled through the high windows. Eleanor closed the Bible gently, her mind already turning over possibilities. If the note was real, if it truly pointed to something hidden beneath that chapel, it could change everything historians thought they knew about the Templars in this region. She knew she couldn't simply walk away. She had to find out. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strengths, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Sir Alaric's life. Gathering her notes, Eleanor locked the Bible in the rare books cabinet. Her heart was still racing as she stepped into the cool evening air outside, the scent of rain in the breeze. The chapel was less than an hour's walk from here. She didn't need a plan tonight, just the knowledge that something extraordinary might be waiting, and yet, beneath the excitement, another feeling stirred, one she couldn't quite name. It was as if the shadows had shifted the moment she read those words, as though the world around her had quietly tilted toward danger. Eleanor's footsteps echoed through the narrow cobblestone streets as she made her way to Dr. Leonard Braithwaite's modest home. She could have gone straight to the chapel that night. Every restless instinct in her urged her to, but caution had always been her quiet ally. If anyone could verify the marginal note's significance, it was Leonard. His house was a museum in itself, every wall lined with bookshelves sagging under the weight of medieval history. When he opened the door, the familiar scent of old paper and pipe tobacco drifted out. "Eleanor!" he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up before narrowing with suspicion. "You only knock this late when you found something troubling." She didn't bother with pleasantries. Once inside, she carefully pulled the Bible from her satchel and set it on his desk. Leonard's fingers trembled as he adjusted his glasses, scanning the margin where she'd marked the faded writing. Minutes passed in silence, save for the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then Leonard let out a long breath. "Do you have any idea what you're holding?" he asked, his voice low. Eleanor gave a cautious shrug. "Enough to know I need your opinion." Leonard leaned back, removing his glasses. "That handwriting is 14th century, no doubt about it. And the phrasing," he tapped the words, "under the chapel, where the brothers sleep. That's Templar burial language. I've seen it before in documents from southern France." The confirmation sent a shiver down her spine, but his next words chilled her further. "Eleanor, you must be careful. This isn't a treasure hunt. Every time someone has gone looking for what the Templars hid, it's ended badly. Sometimes fatally. Do you remember Daniel Rooks?" She did. The young historian who had vanished 2 years ago while researching rumored Templar relics in Spain. His disappearance had been quietly buried in academic circles, but whispers lingered. Leonard continued, "These clues, they were never meant for the uninitiated. The Templars used them to guide only their most trusted brethren. Outsiders, they were discouraged." There was an unspoken weight to that word. Eleanor met his gaze, noting the faint tremor in his voice. "You think there's danger in even following this?" "I know there is," Leonard replied, leaning closer. "And there's another thing. That chapel, the one with the rose window, it's been locked for decades. No public access. There were incidents. Local legends speak of strange lights inside at night, and of people who tried to explore and came back. Different." Eleanor's skepticism stirred, but so did her curiosity. "Different how?" Leonard's jaw tightened. "They wouldn't speak of what they saw, but their eyes—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I swore I'd never go near it again." She hesitated, torn between the cold logic of caution and the electric pull of discovery. "Then why are you telling me all this?" she asked softly. Leonard's expression softened into something almost paternal. "Because I know you, Eleanor. Once your mind catches on a thread, you'll follow it, even if it leads into the dark. At least now you'll know what shadows you might meet there." For a long moment the only sound was the wind rattling the window panes. Eleanor closed the Bible and slipped it back into her satchel. "Thank you," she said quietly, though in truth his warning had only sharpened her resolve. As she stepped back into the cool night air, the image of the rose window burned in her mind. She imagined sunlight pouring through its stained glass, casting shapes on the chapel floor that might align only on certain days, perhaps pointing the way. The marginal note had been the invitation. Leonard's warning had been the challenge. The thought that the Templars themselves had hidden something, and that she might be the first in centuries to see it, was too intoxicating to ignore. Danger or not, she was going to the chapel. Eleanor spent the next morning in the dim back room of the library, poring over high-resolution photographs she'd taken of the Bible's margins. The words were still as faint as cobwebs, but in the clarity of daylight, she began to notice something she'd missed before. Tiny embellishments in the capital letters of the surrounding scripture. At first, she thought they were decorative flourishes common to illuminated manuscripts, but as she traced the shapes with her fingertip, she realized they weren't random at all. The first letter of each verse on the page contained an extra stroke, a subtle tilt, or a curious dot. She printed a copy of the page and began to mark the letters that bore these irregularities. Slowly, a pattern emerged. When she arranged them in sequence, they spelled out words. Latin words, lumen rosum revelabit. The light will reveal the rose. Her breath caught. It was the same phrase hinted at in the marginal note. She dug into the library's archives and found a centuries-old sketch of the chapel Leonard had described, its great rose window dominating the western wall. She studied the drawing, mind racing. If the Templars had designed the window to cast light in a particular way, then there might be a certain time of day, or even a certain time of year, when sunlight would pass through it and strike a specific point inside the chapel. And if that point marked an entrance, she was still lost in thought when the morning mail arrived. Among the bills and catalogues was a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single square of parchment, aged and brittle, with a simple ink drawing, the rose window drawn from inside the chapel with a beam of light falling onto what looked like the edge of a stone altar. No sender, no message, just that drawing. Eleanor stared at it for a long time, the air in the room suddenly heavy. Someone knew what she had found, and they wanted her to follow the trail. A part of her recoiled, the rational part that remembered Leonard's stories of disappearances and changes in those who trespassed. But another part of her, deeper and more defiant, surged forward. If someone else was already on this path, they might get there first, and she couldn't let that happen. She pulled the Bible from her bag one more time, flipping through until her eyes caught on the scripture illustrations scattered throughout. They were mostly small, saints, vines, and angels, but in 3 of them she spotted the same Templar cross she'd seen in the margin. Each time it was hidden in plain sight, a fold of a robe here, the angle of a staff there. She copied them into her notebook, laying them out in order. When she aligned the drawings edge to edge, they formed a crude but unmistakable map, not of the town, but of the hill just beyond it, where the old chapel stood. A thrill shot through her. The marginal note hadn't been the only clue. The book itself was a puzzle, and she was finally starting to see its shape. But with that thrill came a shadow of unease. This was no accident. Whoever had left these clues had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide them and to ensure they survived through the centuries. That meant whatever lay at the end of this trail was more than just gold or relics. As she gathered her things, her gaze fell on the unmarked envelope once more. The timing was too perfect. Whoever sent it had to know she'd cracked part of the code. She wondered if they were watching her now. The thought made her check the window, scanning the street outside. Empty. Too empty, she turned away, clutching her satchel. The chapel waited, and the light through the rose would not reveal itself forever. The chapel stood like a sentinel on the crest of the hill, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Ivy clung to its sides like green veins, and the great rose window, fractured but still intact, gazed down on Eleanor with an expressionless patience. She had timed her arrival deliberately just before sunset, when the low light might angle through the stained glass and match the sketch from the anonymous envelope. The path was overgrown, and the wooden door at the front was barred from the inside with a rusted chain. She wasn't surprised. Leonard had told her no one had been inside for decades, but the marginal note had been clear. Under the chapel. And the map formed by the Bible's hidden illustrations had marked a point behind the building. Circling around, she found the back of the chapel nearly swallowed by shadow. Here, the ground sloped toward a patch of wild grass and crumbling stone. She brushed away the foliage and uncovered what looked like the top of an old staircase, sealed with slabs of limestone. Her heart thudded. The stone was heavy, but the years had loosened its grip on the earth. With effort, she managed to pry one slab aside just far enough to slip into the darkness below. The air that rose up was damp and stale, tinged with the scent of ancient dust and something metallic, like old coins or blood. She descended cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom to reveal walls of rough-hewn stone. At the bottom, the passage narrowed, leading her into a low chamber beneath the chapel floor. She could hear the faint creak of the building above, as though it were aware of her trespass. In the center of the chamber, a patch of light spilled through a narrow gap in the ceiling. She tilted her head. It aligned perfectly with the rose window above. The colored glass fragmenting the sunlight into crimson and gold. The beam fell on a single flagstone, different from the others, smoother, and marked with the flared Templar cross. Eleanor's breath caught. She ran her fingers over the symbol, feeling a shallow groove along one edge. It was a trapdoor. She hesitated. This was the moment. The threshold between curiosity and commitment. Beyond this stone, there might be nothing but dust and disappointment, or something so extraordinary it would change her life forever. Steeling herself, she braced her hands and heaved. The flagstone lifted with surprising ease, revealing a black void beneath. Her flashlight beam revealed a steep, narrow staircase descending farther into the earth. The deeper she went, the colder the air became, and the walls grew damp. The echo of her footsteps was muffled, as though the darkness itself absorbed sound. Then, without warning, the steps ended in a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Carved into its surface was the Templar cross again, this time encircled by Latin words, Soli dignus intrabit. Only the worthy shall enter. Eleanor's hand hovered over the iron handle. She had no key, but when she pressed against the wood, it groaned and swung inward on ancient hinges. A gust of cold air met her face, carrying the scent of candle wax and leather. Her light swept forward and caught the glint of something big, rows upon rows of bindings, shelves carved directly into the stone walls. It wasn't treasure in gold or jewels, it was treasure in words. The library was close. Eleanor stepped through the doorway, her flashlight's beam skimming over the uneven floor. The room before her was not large, perhaps the size of a small chapel, but it radiated an atmosphere of deliberate construction. Every stone, every groove seemed placed with a purpose. The air was colder here, dense with the scent of aged leather and something sharper, iron, maybe, or the faint tang of long-burned oil lamps. She took one cautious step forward, and the sound of her boot echoed back oddly, as if the walls were listening. That was when she saw the first mechanism. To her right, a narrow gap in the floor exposed a set of interlocked gears, each one rusted but still aligned. The beam of her flashlight caught a thin wire strung across the path ahead at shin height, almost invisible. One careless step, and the gears would trigger. What? Her breath slowed, her focus sharpening. She skirted the wire, ducking beneath a stone archway into a second chamber. This one was more elaborate. On the far wall, 3 heavy levers protruded from the stone, each marked with a different Templar symbol: a sword, a chalice, and a cross. The marginal note's words rose unbidden in her mind. Where the brothers sleep, light through the rose. She scanned the floor and spotted faint scratches leading toward the lever marked with the chalice. Dust clung more thickly to the other 2, undisturbed for decades, perhaps centuries. She grasped the chalice lever and pulled. A deep grinding echoed from the walls, and a section of the floor ahead shifted, revealing a low passage. But even as the way opened, another sound followed, a heavy click from behind her. She spun in time to see a section of the ceiling above the archway drop slightly. Thin metal spikes, dulled with age but still lethal, slid into view. The trap had been triggered, but the lever had locked the mechanism halfway, sparing her. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This was no theatrical set-piece for curious historians. These were defenses meant to kill. The Templars had guarded their secrets with the same precision they brought to battle. Eleanor pressed on, the low passage forcing her to crouch until it opened into a circular chamber. Here, the stone floor was carved with intricate patterns, a mosaic of symbols she recognized from Templar lore. Some were crosses, others the geometric seals used in their secret codes. At the center, a raised pedestal supported a stone sphere the size of a melon, its surface carved with the petals of a rose. A thin beam of light from somewhere high above struck the sphere exactly at its center, sending fractured shadows dancing across the walls. She approached cautiously, studying the patterns the shadows formed. As she watched, the shifting light aligned with one particular symbol on the wall, a keyhole-shaped carving almost hidden in the stonework. Her hands trembled as she pressed the sphere. It rotated smoothly, clicking into place. Somewhere inside the walls, a hidden lock disengaged. A final section of the chamber's far wall slid open, revealing a stairway spiraling downward into total darkness. She shone her flashlight into the void. The beam seemed to be swallowed whole, barely touching the next step. She took a deep breath. Every nerve in her body screamed that the real secret, the one worth centuries of traps and blood, lay below. She started down, step by slow step. The stairway spiraled down so far Eleanor lost count of the steps. The air grew colder, denser, carrying a faint mineral tang as if she were descending into the bones of the earth itself. Her flashlight's narrow beam brushed over walls carved with meticulous care, not rough-hewn but smoothed and marked with faint, almost ghostly inscriptions, Latin phrases, Templar mottos. At last the staircase opened into a cavernous hall. Eleanor froze at the threshold, her breath catching in her throat. It was a library, but nothing like the cloistered rooms she'd known all her life. This was vast, its arched ceiling vanishing into darkness, the space lit not by her torch alone, but by dozens of candles set in iron sconces along the walls. The flames flickered in still air, as if they had been lit moments before her arrival. Shelves carved from the very stone stretched outward like the spokes of a wheel, radiating from a massive central table. On those shelves lay hundreds, perhaps thousands, of volumes, bound manuscripts, rolled parchments, codices wrapped in protective cloth. The scent was intoxicating. Leather, parchment, and the faint bite of old ink. She stepped inside, the sound of her boots muffled on a rug so ancient its pattern had faded into muted shades of red and gold. Every instinct told her she was in a place untouched by the outside world for centuries. Eleanor's eyes roamed the shelves, reading the gilded titles where the light caught them. Liber Pergamentorum Occultorum, Scriptum de Clypius Christi. There were works she recognized from historical records, books thought destroyed during the suppression of the Templars, but there were others, titles she had never seen, in languages she couldn't even identify. A shiver ran down her spine. These were not just records of the Templars' military or religious orders, they were repositories of knowledge, forbidden knowledge. She saw diagrams of intricate devices centuries ahead of their time, maps of lands that didn't exist on any modern chart, treatises on alchemy and medicine that hinted at cures for diseases still feared today. She reached for a manuscript bound in black leather, its cover embossed with a 7-pointed star. As her fingers brushed it, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't touch that." Eleanor jerked back, spinning toward the source. A figure stepped from between two shelves, tall, robed in dark wool, the hood casting his face in shadow. But his eyes caught the candlelight, glinting like steel. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she felt. "I am the keeper," he said simply. His voice was deep, carrying an authority that felt older than the stones around them. "And you are far from welcome." Her pulse pounded. "I followed the clues. The marginal note. The map. They were not meant for you," he interrupted, stepping closer. "The path was set for one who is worthy. Tell me, Eleanor Fairchild, why have you come?" His knowledge of her name sent a fresh wave of unease through her. She swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "Because this knowledge shouldn't be hidden forever. History deserves to know the truth." The keeper tilted his head, as if weighing her answer. "Truth is a dangerous gift," he said. "In the wrong hands, it destroys. In the right, it preserves. Which are you?" Before she could answer, he gestured toward the black-bound manuscript. That book alone could topple governments and ignite wars. The Templars guarded such things for a reason. "Are you ready to carry that burden?" Eleanor glanced around the hall, at the mountains of knowledge, the centuries of secrecy. She realized with a sudden clarity that this was no simple discovery. To take even a fraction of it into the world would change everything. and there would be no turning back. The keeper's eyes never left her. "Prove your worth," he said quietly, "or leave and never return." The keeper's words hung in the candlelit air like a sentence waiting to be passed. Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze, heavy as the stone above them. This was no empty threat. She sensed that failing whatever test he meant would mean she would never see daylight again. "What does proving my worth involve?" she asked, her voice low. He stepped aside, revealing a long wooden table in the center of the library. Upon it lay a spread of objects, a silver chalice, a folded map, a dagger with a worn leather hilt, and a single sheet of parchment covered in tightly written Latin. The Templars believed that worthiness was not measured by strength or rank, the keeper said, but by discernment, the ability to choose rightly when all choices carry risk. He gestured to the items. "One of these will lead you deeper into the truth. The others will lead you to ruin. Choose." Eleanor's eyes moved from object to object. Her instincts tugged her toward the parchment, the librarian in her drawn to the written word. But the keeper's stillness reminded her of every warning she'd been given. The Templars had loved their traps. She stepped closer, examining without touching. The chalice bore an inscription: "Sanguis custodit veritatem." Blood guards the truth. The dagger's hilt was engraved with the same rose motif she'd followed here. The map was different, not of the town or the hill, but of a coastline she didn't recognize, marked with the same flared cross from the Bible's margin. The parchment's Latin was dense, but one phrase leapt at her: "Qui non querit cum humilitate peribit." He who does not seek with humility will perish. Her mind churned. Humility. The marginal note had come from the hand of someone careful, someone hiding truth in whispers rather than proclamations. The Templars, for all their power, had valued secrecy over glory. She looked up at the keeper. His face was still in shadow, but she caught the faintest shift in his posture. Anticipation. With deliberate slowness, she set her hand on the parchment. "Knowledge is guarded by humility," she said, more to herself than to him. "Not by steel or maps or even holy vessels." For a moment nothing happened. Then the keeper's hand moved, not to stop her, but to push the parchment toward her. "You have chosen well." He motioned for her to unroll it fully. As she did, her breath caught. The densely written Latin was not a treatise or sermon, but a cipher. And in the margin, drawn in the same faint ink she'd seen in the Bible, was another map. This one of the library itself, with a single chamber marked beyond the shelves. "This," the keeper said, "is the inner vault. What you've seen so far is a library. What lies there is the heart of the Templars' purpose." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "But remember, knowing is not the same as understanding, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the parchment. The next choice would not be about an object, but about herself. "Show me," she said. The keeper's eyes glinted in the candlelight. "Very well. But you walk there on your own." He turned away, vanishing into the shadows between the shelves. A single candle flared to life on the far side of the room, illuminating a narrow corridor she hadn't noticed before. Her heart pounded as she stepped toward it, parchment in hand. Somewhere beyond those shelves waited the final truth, the one the Templars had buried beneath centuries of stone and silence. The narrow corridor was colder than the rest of the library, the candlelight barely reaching the walls. Eleanor moved slowly, her fingers brushing the rough stone, the parchment clutched tight in her other hand. The silence was oppressive, pressing on her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat. At the end of the passage, an iron gate barred her way. The flared Templar cross was etched deep into its surface, surrounded by a ring of Latin text, non luceat nisi dignis. Let it not shine except for the worthy. She hesitated. Beyond this gate was the inner vault, the heart of the Templars' purpose, as the keeper had called it. She thought of Leonard's warnings, of the anonymous envelope, of every choice she had made to get here. Curiosity had driven her this far. But what if what lay beyond was not meant to be known, not even by her? The thought passed like a shadow. She reached for the latch. To her surprise, it opened without resistance. The gate swung inward with a whisper of metal. The chamber beyond was smaller than she expected, circular, domed, with a single pedestal in the center. Upon it sat a sealed chest of blackened oak, reinforced with tarnished silver bands. The candlelight flickered across its surface, revealing the same rose motif she had seen in the Bible's margins. Eleanor stepped forward. There was no lock, no key, only a latch. Her hand trembled as she lifted it. Inside, wrapped in layers of linen, were scrolls, not hundreds, not even dozens, just 3. Each was sealed with crimson wax, stamped with the Templar cross. She set them gently on the pedestal and broke the seal of the first. Her eyes raced over the text. It was a confession, written by a Templar master just before the Order's dissolution. It spoke of treasures, hidden, yes, but not gold or relics. The treasures were truths, accounts of political betrayals, secret alliances, heresies protected for the sake of power, names of kings, popes, merchants, all laid bare. The second scroll was stranger still. Diagrams of machines, unlike anything she had ever seen, centuries ahead of their time. Devices to harness energy, to heal, to destroy. The kind of inventions that could rewrite history if unleashed too soon. Her hands trembled as she opened the third scroll. It was the shortest, but somehow the heaviest, a prophecy written in careful Latin, foretelling a time when the keepers shall fail and the truths they guarded would be revealed, either to rebuild the world or bring it to its knees. Eleanor stood frozen, the words swimming in her mind. This was why the Templars had hidden their library. This was why traps and guardians still stood watch. Knowledge was power, and some power was too dangerous to release. Footsteps sounded behind her. The keeper emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "You understand now," he said quietly. "The world is not ready." Eleanor met his gaze. "And if I disagree?" "Then you leave here," he said, "carrying the weight of what you've seen, but without the means to prove it. That is the price of knowing. You cannot share it without destroying it." She looked down at the scrolls. Every instinct screamed to take them, to show the world. But Leonard's warning echoed in her mind, as did the Templar's own words. "He who does not seek with humility will perish." Slowly, she placed the scrolls back in the chest and closed the lid. "I came for the truth," she said, "and I found it. That's enough." The keeper inclined his head just once. "Then you are worthy." Weeks later, back in the quiet of her library, Eleanor often thought of the vault beneath the chapel. She returned the Bible to its shelf. The marginal note, now her private secret. Sometimes she would pause in front of it, her fingers lingering on the spine, and wonder if anyone else would ever follow its trail. She knew the answer. Some secrets guard themselves, not with locks and traps, but with the burden they place on those who find them. Moral. True strength lies not in claiming what you can, but in choosing what you must leave untouched. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.